Good morning, everyone. Welcome to an all-new edition of Artsbeat TV and Radio here on Westfield Community Programming Channel 15, 89.5 FM WSKB, and our media partners at Southwick Community Television and Agawa Media. I'm your host, Mark Auerbach, and today we're going to Playhouse on Park down in West Hartford, where a new musical called Bandstand is in tech and about to open, and we're here with their director, Sean Harris. Sean, it's good to see you.
Mark, it's so good to see you. Sorry, tech is so insane right now.
Tell me a little bit about Bandstand. I know it was on Broadway for a brief period of time, and it's a musical, and it's not about Dick Clark, but give us a little rundown on what Bandstand is.
Sure, I know, and that's one of our challenges, is because I think when people hear Bandstand, they do think of Dick Clark in Philadelphia. It was, and you're right, it was done on Broadway, then it was done on the tour. We are only the third production to do it regionally. And it takes place in 1945. VJ Day just happened, and the show runs between like Labor Day and December of 1945. And the soldiers come back from war. And the world, especially it takes place kind of in Cleveland, and the world kind of has moved on and trying to push kind of the war behind them. But you have all these soldiers with kind of these demons and PTSD and their survivor guilt, and that are kind of coming in at a different place than the rest of the world. And there is a lot of juxtaposition between those two worlds. And one of the soldiers coming back, Donnie Nowitzki, he was like a musical prodigy, and there's a contest by NBC looking for the next great American swing band. And Donnie has this idea: I'll put this band together with only vets. And a lot of it is these vets coming together to heal, to find their place, to find their sense of kind of belonging and their place in the world as the world is kind of moving on, and them coming together as a unit and compete in this contest. And it's got tremendous swing dancing in it. The musicians, 6 are actor musicians, so they are playing on stage. We do have a pit, but backstage as well. But we have they're acting and singing and playing their faces off, and we're following their journey through these kind of 4 months to compete in this contest.
Now, I know that the show got great reviews for its dancing when it was on Broadway. It's original music, though. It's not swing music of the period.
It is. Yeah, it is. And when it was originally done, Andy Blankenbuehler directed it and choreographed it. And he's such an amazing choreographer. And you can see that there's movement throughout the entire show. We've kind of split it a little bit. Like, so I'm directing the show, Darlene, my partner, and we also have a new choreographer for us, Robert Misk. And we are kind of doing a lot of movement throughout the show, but we're also really focusing on driving the story as well. Not saying they didn't do that in the Broadway version, but I know that with kind of a director and 2 choreographers, we're really trying to find that really balance between the storytelling and the choreography. But the choreography is through the entire show. Tons and tons of dancing.
And in terms of the dancing and this particular kind of show, it's a different musical than most theaters do. And you guys are known for doing musicals that the mainstream repertory theater companies are not doing. You did the Scottsboro Boys a couple of years ago by Kander and Ebb, which was a controversial musical that deserved an audience that it didn't have. And Bandstand is sort of similar in that genre, in the fact that it really deserved a larger audience at the time, but people are just not doing it.
I totally agree. And then the tour happened and COVID happened, and I think that stopped the show. And, you know, interestingly, because there's only 3 productions, it's a very niche. I think one of the reasons why it's not done is you need these players that play. So if you see like $1 Million Quartet or any of these other instrument heavy actor shows, right? People that do $1 Million Quartet then do it at a couple different locations. We have 3 people that are in the pit that also played those other productions. Not in the pit, in the band on stage.
So
but yeah, it died because of COVID a little bit.
Yeah. And In terms of this show, because it's dance heavy, are you rehearsing it differently than you might with another production?
Yeah, I would say that. I think one thing too, which I hope everybody comes to see it, is in this sense of the community kind of moving as these vets are coming in kind of this different place, emotional place. The set is constantly moving, so it's almost like a Tetris puzzle. There's platforms that come in, that spin, that rotate, that are constantly moving. So in order to rehearse the show, we've also had to rehearse all the transitions of all the locations. There's about 30 locations in the show. So in order to keep that fluidity going, so not only do we have to rehearse like it's not like if we're doing chorus line and like I'll do the book scenes and Darlene will do 16 going on 17 or whatever. Not that's
Yeah.
that's the music, but you know the song I'm thinking about. Dance 10 looks 3 or something, right? And but instead of that, we're actually all in the rehearsal room together figuring out how to move that story, how to move that scene into the next scene, how to transition that, and all the dancing is swing. So unlike like if we were doing a show like Chorus Line, and for one we have to be completely together, this you have like 6 couples doing completely different things. So it's kind of, we were talking about yesterday, I think it's one of those shows in which you might want to see a couple times because there's worlds that are going on and they're flipping and jumping and lifting each other and all that.
It's a genre of musical. I think of when I hear about Bandstand, I think about Steel Pier that Kander and Ebb did. That was a very fluid dance thing, or Contact that Susan Stroman did, or New York, New York that's on Broadway right now. That's all dance driven. I mean, there's a million different plots, but it's really one dance sequence moving into another, and it's almost cinematic.
Absolutely. And in the beginning of this show, we kind of have these flashback moments too to kind of Guadalcanal, because there is a tragedy that happened at the beginning of the play that then goes through, and it goes through kind of like nightmares, and we see the kind of the effects of PTSD through the show. With that, there's this opening sequence. We were talking about it having this cinematic quality. We also have a dancer throughout who's representing kind of like the fallen soldiers, and he's doing contemporary and balletic movement throughout the show too. That incorporated with some of the lighting and some of the transitions does create this kind of cinematic quality as you're talking about. Definitely.
Sean, what made you choose Bandstand? I mean, you're one of the 3 co-founders of Playhouse on Park, and you have a big say in the programming that the theater does. But this show resonates with you. What made you choose to do Bandstand?
I think there's a couple things. I think the story of like that sense of belonging, and the sense and like the idea of belonging, but then the idea of healing with others and healing through your grief through music and through connection, I think really resonated with me. I think there is some parallels to kind of how the world, our season this year is about perseverance. And I think that plays on a couple different levels. One is we've been persevering as a theater through this post-COVID world. All these theaters are closing right now. It's so terrible that even like this week, a couple theaters announced that they were closing. And I think because we made it through getting the kind of the federal money, right? And then now we're relying on ticket sales, and ticket sales are like 30% of what they used to be, right? So a lot of theaters aren't able to do it, and we are really working to persevere. And I think there's something about this show and these soldiers persevering, connected to the theater and connected to us as humans right now, that is so relatable.
Since you are one of the people that's choosing the productions that are happening in the future, we'll have to talk in a second about that. But for those of you that are interested in seeing Bandstand, it runs through August 20th at Playhouse on Park in West Hartford, and you can get tickets at playhouseonpark.org. Had to throw that in there.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
So what are some of the shows you're planning for next season? Because there is no end of a season and beginning of a new one anymore. It's just going from one to the next.
I mean, we close August 20th. We open the next one. Like we start rehearsing like right after Labor Day. It's insane. Um, so next year, so sometimes we will think of the shows and think of then like the theme that kind of ties it. Like I was saying about the Perseverance. This year is different because this is our 15th anniversary season. And so I think there's an element of celebration within us. And then I also there is this, we've done some heavy shows this year. Fences, Indecent. Bandstand, even though it's very joyous, has some heavy elements to it. And I think that we wanted to really create a sense of escapism next year, joy, laughter, lightness for our audiences, and also kind of this sense of celebration. So that's kind of where everything kind of materialized between what we were going to do and then what and then figuring out how to kind of tie celebration into it. So do you want me to go through a couple of pieces?
Sure.
Oh, sure, great. The other thing that we're starting to do is really figuring out how to kind of foster new work, but like any smaller theater and theaters that are still developing our audience, we have to be careful about the new work that it needs to have some sort of like a hook or some reason for someone who might not be a subscriber to come see it. So it's harder than just doing a new work, right? So next year what we're doing is a lot of new work, but they might have had 1 or 2 productions, but they all have hooks and something to kind of wrap your ear around if you hear about it. So we're starting with Jane Austen. We did a Pride and Prejudice and written by Kate Hamill, who we're doing another play of hers this year and this coming year. And we also had a big ask from our community, from audiences, for more Jane Austen. And I have friends that run this theater company in Philadelphia that created a play that's called The Complete Works of Jane Austen Abridged. And it was done to incredible responses in Philadelphia. And we are having the original director and the original cast do that production at the theater. So we're really proud to open with something that's fast, funny, something for people that are like hardcore Jane Austen fans, which there's many of them, but then also people that are kind of like understanding Jane Austen for the first time. So it's kind of like a Shakespeare abridged feel to it. Then we're doing another newer piece called Pinup Girls, a musical love letter, which isn't really, it's kind of misleading because it's not really about pinup girls as much as it's about, it's another way. This story is kind of memorializing, I think, veterans in a lot of ways. That show is more of like a celebration to veterans. Letters are read in the show. Letters from the community will be read in the show. There's an interactive element to it, but it goes through music. It's kind of a jukebox show. It goes through music from World War I to present day, and it's all weaving together letters to from soldiers home or from people home to soldiers. Our third show, which is around January, is that show I was talking about that was written by Kate Hamill. I'm so excited that we got this play because it's only been done in 1 or 2 theaters. It's called Ms. Holmes and Ms. Watson, Apartment 2B. And it is a kind of a feminist take on Sherlock Holmes, done in a contemporary world, full of amazing theatricality. And I think we're saying like we're kind of celebrating like women in theater with that show, or celebrating the theatricality. It's like it throws every part of theater on it, but it gives a surprising twist to it. So it's almost like the freshness of theater we're celebrating. Tony Stone. Do you know Tony Stone, Mark?
No, I don't.
Tony Stone, I never found out about who Tony Stone was until this play came out, and it's based on a book. This is part of like our celebration of like those stories, the forgotten stories, let's say, because Tony Stone was the first female baseball player. She played in the Negro Leagues, and it's an amazing story of how what a statistician she was, how specific she was as like in her knowledge of the game, and then her journey throughout. And she really broke all these barriers. And it's amazing that she's a story that we've never heard of before. And then we're ending with the prom, which is a huge, huge story of celebration. It's a story of inclusivity. It's a story of like really celebrating the other and what kind of brings us together. And I think that's a nice way to capture this kind of 15th anniversary season of celebration.
And I think the prom is euphoric. There's that one song, Barry Goes to the Prom, that I just remember from seeing the show that was absolutely euphoric. You walk out of the prom and you feel great, whether you had a good time at your prom or not.
Exactly. There's something about seeing, there's something about the climax of that show that you can't help but like have the biggest smile on your face.
Well, I'm really looking forward to what you all are doing, and particularly Bandstand. And I think that as we all go to the theater more and more, we need to seek out shows that have a message but are entertaining at the same time. And you guys have certainly found that mix.
Well, our mission is challenge, entertain, and educate. And we try to find a way to do all three of them without maybe beating you over the head with those ideas, but you are challenged by them. So the idea is that they're really smart and they keep you like engaged, but they also do entertain you, and they are about something that's bigger than us. That's like our goal. And if we could find shows that do all three of them, and you can see like Fences and Indecent and our world premiere of Webster's Bitch this year, they all did those kind of things.
And I understand that among the Connecticut Theater Critics Awards that just happened, that Playhouse on Park picked up quite a few awards.
We did. And I think there was something really special this year in which it wasn't as much of a surprise to the rest of the community, the theater community, I think, because it used to be when we've won awards in the past, and we won for like Anne Frank years ago and for Spelling Bee years ago. We were like the newbies, but now it's 14 years. This is our 14th season, and winning awards. We just won an award for Best Actor, which is the first time, and ensemble and lighting, and also some of the design awards, which is just really, I feel like, I don't know, we felt after we left there, we're really part of this theater community in Connecticut right now. And it was just a wonderful feeling. And to hear to talk to other artistic directors and to critics talking about how much they were moved by our productions it felt so good for us and as a staff. And we always show up at the Connecticut Critics Circle with like a big cheering section of a staff, and it was great for us to really feel that we could celebrate.
That's fabulous. Anyway, folks, Sean, thanks. I know you have to go back to tech rehearsal, but thanks for joining us. We've been chatting with Sean Harris from Playhouse on Park, where Bandstand is running, playhouseonpark.org. Good luck with the show, and can't wait to see your upcoming season, Sean.
Mark, thank you so much. Hope to see you at Bandstand.
Okay, take care. We're going to take a break to acknowledge our underwriters, so we'll be back with more Artsbeat, so don't go away.
Support for the community programming of WSKB is provided by the Dunkin' Donut Shops of Westfield and the Sardinia family. It's nice to know that even as the world changes, Dunkin' Coffee remains the same at 7 convenient locations throughout Westfield.
Underwriting for the community programming of WSKB is provided by the Boys and Girls Club of Greater Westfield, serving the youth of the Whip City and surrounding communities since 1969. For more information on the Great Futures Club for ages 3 to 5, happening weekdays, and the Club Teen Center for ages 11 and older, weekdays from 6:30 till 8 p.m., go online at bcgwestfield.org or visit the club at 28 West Silver Street. The Boys and Girls Club of Greater Westfield. Great futures start here.
Join me, Tina Gorman, each week from 6 to 8 a.m. for Wake Up Wednesday, when my guests and I discuss health, wellness, and lifestyle reimagined.
Community Radio.
89.5 WSKB.
Live from Studio 120 at Westfield Technical Academy, this is WCPC Channel 15 and 89.5 FM WSKB Westfield.
Welcome back to Artsbeat, everyone. I'm Mark Auerbach, and Peter Coles is our chief engineer today. One of the great things about living and working here in Western New England is the fact that we have great music, great dance, great theater, and we have our own opera company, the Berkshire Opera Festival. And they perform twice a year, one big production and then some smaller concerts, primarily in Berkshire County. And they're doing one of the opera masterpieces of all time, La Boheme, at the end of the summer. They've had a couple of concerts coming. They've got one in a week or two. And Jonathan Loy, who's one of their directors, is here to share the news about La Boheme and everything else that's going on. How is the summer going for Berkshire Opera Festival?
Hey there. Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
We're off to a good start. We had our gala at Gedney Farm on June 11th. Big crowd. The newest winner of the Metropolitan Opera Competition sang at our gala, Teresa Perrotta, and big success. Always trying to raise a lot of money so that we can keep opera in the Berkshires. We're leading up to July 22nd at the Mahawi to do our Breaking the Mold concert. So that's Baroque, Bel Canto, and Beyond at 2 p.m. And then, of course, all leading up to the opening of La Boheme at the Colonial Theater in Pittsfield.
And
so that's kind of what's going on.
People always ask, because we don't get a lot of opera here. I mean, if you want to see opera, you primarily have to go to New York to the Met, or go to one of the movie theaters that screens the Met in high def over the course of the season. But first of all, Boheme is a full production, correct?
Yes.
And sung in its original language.
Yes.
And for those people that don't understand Italian, is it surtitled or subtitled?
Yes, surtitled. We project the English translation of what they're singing in Italian above the stage. So you can follow along if you're not familiar with La Boheme and know exactly what they're saying.
I would think that a lot of people are familiar with La Boheme. First of all, some of the music is well known whether you know opera or not. I heard a couple of weeks ago Musetta's Waltz on Muzak when I was walking through a mall, and I went, whoa, I know where that came from. But it's the musical Rent, which it seems like everybody knows is derived from La Boheme.
Yes.
It's sort of a classic love story.
It's a classic love story. There's a reason that it is the most produced opera certainly in the country, and I think in the world, on a yearly basis. People know it. It speaks to people. It's truly, it's accessible. If you've not been to an opera before, I think it's very approachable in terms of sitting down in the seat, the lights go out. You don't need to know so much beforehand. The music just takes you on this journey. The story is timeless. And you get engrossed in these characters' lives. It's great storytelling that Puccini gives us, for sure.
Yeah, and since you work in opera and you're involved in it, and you're picking and choosing the operas, what made you pick and choose Boheme? It is one of the most popular operas around, but it's one that people will go back and see 2 or 3 times.
Sure. Anyone that's familiar with Berkshire Opera Festival, when Brian and I started the company, it was important for us to show the opera world and the general audience that we weren't just going to be a Boheme, Traviata, Carmen opera company, right? Because if you start that way, kind of get stuck in that cycle. And so we started off with Madame Butterfly, which it does have name recognition, but is not one of the top produced operas. And then made a strong decision in the second season to do Strauss's Ariadne auf Naxos, which actually garnered a great deal of press attention and attention in the opera world. Why is this company doing in their second season such a rare, tricky piece? And we did it to great critical acclaim. And I think people realized we weren't going to be your typical standard rep opera company. And that was important for us to show that we were going to give our audiences a wide range and explore the operatic repertoire. So now in our 8th season, it's time to give the public, what they want, what people think they want. And of course, it sells a lot of tickets. We're coming out of COVID, and we're trying to get everyone, all theater groups are trying to get people back into seats the way that it used to be. And Bohème is a great way to do that. And as many times as Brian and I have done Bohème or worked on it or seen it, when you crack open that score again, there's a reason. What you realize very quickly why people love it, why it's the most produced opera, and it's really amazing. And restudying it has been a joy, quite frankly. So that's why now.
But you've been able to do classical, or I shouldn't say classical opera. You've been able to do name brand opera like La Bohème, but you've also, over the years, done contemporary works,
Yes.
new pieces that kind of push the envelope a little bit as well. So your audiences are learning to expect both over the course of the season.
Exactly. A part of our mission, if you read it, is to explore the entire operatic repertoire. It's incredibly important to do new works, lesser known works. That's how you keep an art form alive. People throw around all the time, oh, the art form's dying, right? People have been saying that probably for the last 200 years. But it continues to exist because each generation produces new works, and you have to find a way to engage audiences in a different way. And that includes doing the standard repertoire, for sure. But you have to mix it in with other things. And even though we've currently taken a brief hiatus from doing our second stage productions, as we and everyone else recover from COVID, the plan is in 2025 to come back to that. So in the meantime, we give you really great standard repertoire over the next 2 years that people love and know.
What made you guys decide that you wanted to bring an opera company to the Berkshires when there is so much music and theater already here?
Yeah, that's a good question. And right, this is a really diverse, probably the most culturally rich place in the country, I think, in the summer for sure, and at the highest level. But having said that, there was no opera. We know that there was. I kind of grew up in the summers in the Berkshires. I have a lot of family here, and I actually worked I did shows at the old opera company. I knew them, but they disappeared in 2008, along with many other regional companies during that recession. And Brian and I have known each other for a very long time, worked together, always stayed in touch, and always wanted to create an opera company and do it the way we believed that it should be done. And that opportunity presented itself to incorporate the company in 2014. And then we opened in 2016. So yeah, we're talking about the most culturally diverse and rich place in the country in the summer. But there was one thing missing. And it seemed, because I knew the Berkshires well enough and I knew people here, it seemed like the obvious place to do it. And it was going to be a challenge no matter where we did it, right? Starting a fully infrastructured nonprofit arts company, especially opera, in 2014, people called us many things, but here we are in 2023. So surviving and thriving.
Yeah, people ask me, they know that people rehearse a play maybe for 3 weeks, and then you have your technical work in the theater and you do your performances. In a case like Bohème, how much rehearsal time do you get? When do you start working on it? And when did you program it? Did you decide last fall we'll do Bohème this summer, or was this to get the singers that you wanted, you had to plan it a couple of years out?
Yeah, good, very good question. Because of the way the opera world is structured, we have to cast. We put people on hold about a year and a half to 2 years out. And sorry about the noise in the background. About a year and a half to 2 years out, and we're contracting them about a year and a half minimum. So we have a 5-year programming plan. We know what we're doing through 2026, and we'll start a new 5 years within the next 2 years, and we'll know. And then Brian, who is the artistic director and in charge of casting, he's always, about a year and a half out. So, and then in terms of time in the room, because unlike Broadway or straight theater, where oftentimes people come into the rehearsal room on book, right? They don't know, they haven't memorized anything. They're learning during the rehearsal process because they tend to have a lot of time in the room, 6-8 weeks in the room, and then you go into previews. Opera is very different because even if someone is doing a role for the first time, they've taken this to their coach, right, and their voice teacher. They've memorized the role. everyone is walking into that room. No, the conductor, the stage director, and the singers having their role memorized. So what that actually does is lessen the time you need in the room. Even if you're creating, we do all new productions at Berkshire Opera Festival, but even so, when everyone knows their role, you're kind of eliminating 50% of the work, right? So we start rehearsals August 7th with that whole first day is musical rehearsal. Brian sits at conducts with the piano and the singers. They sing through. We hear everyone's voices in the room together for the first time. And he starts creating his musical plan based on that. And then the next day we go into staging. We're in the rehearsal room August 8th through the August 18th. And then we start loading into the theater, and then we have what we call Tech Week, right? Where I'm lighting and we're building the set through that whole week. And then in the evenings, the singers are coming in and we're doing piano rehearsals for the first couple of days. And then the orchestra joins us for the last 2 days, final dress rehearsal, and then we open on August 26th. So I think people are always shocked at actually all this buildup, all this preparation, right? You're a year and a half out. It takes me a year to design a production with my designers, and you're literally in rehearsal for 2 weeks. and you're in Tech Week for a week.
When you're doing doing an opera like Bohème, which has been done a million times before, there are productions that people will say, well, that's the perfect Bohème, or this one or that one. And you're putting it down. Obviously, you can't recreate it or envision it without paying, respect to what it is and all that. How much innovation do you put into a production versus trying to recapture what it might have been at its opening night, whenever it was?
I think that's a great, really complex question. With regard to La Bohème, there are a couple of things that directors should keep in mind. When you're dealing with Puccini, especially in La Bohème, we oftentimes say, directors in theater say, stage directions are meant to be ignored, right? That's what was done on the first opening, and it's a kind of a history of what was done. You cannot ignore Puccini's stage directions in Bohème. They are completely and utterly 100% tied to the text and actually the music that's happening at every second. And he gives you such specific stage directions on every page, almost above every system of the score. If you ignore that, am I allowed to say you're screwed on this show? You're sunk. So what that does is, while BOF is kind of known for taking fresh looks at productions, and we're going to do that, the set, because each act is in a different location. Act 1 and 4 are both in the garret. They're the same, and then 2 and 3 are in different locations. It's difficult to do Bohème on what we call a unit set, which is kind of one set that doesn't change, but we are going to do that, and I think we've done it really well. And I don't want to say too much because I'm hoping a lot of people are going to come see this. Ticket sales are going really well already, but I think I can give a fresh look in terms of the visuals, and how we're physically looking at it, and the costumes. We're doing Victorian fantasy, which gives people that silhouette that they want to see, but gives us kind of creative license to make the characters as beautiful as possible. Because the period of 1830, for me personally, is really ugly. It's not pretty to look at. You got those really poofy shoulders that kind of block people's faces and they can't move around. So Brooke Stanton and I, the costume designer, really are taking incredible creative liberties, but giving you that silhouette that people crave to see when they're coming to see La Bohème. So all to say, I am, as always, really incredibly respectful of the composer and the text and the music, while giving it a fresh look. And with Puccini specifically, and I'm going to say to the cast on the first day, we we ignore stage directions all the time. We do what we want. Not here. We are fun, and actually it's really fun because Bohème is surprisingly a really difficult piece if you want to try to nail every one of those stage directions, because things go so quickly, right? This is not your typical stand and sing aria where you're reflecting on your emotions. This is a through composed moving piece, and things are flying. That act 1 where they're setting the table and getting ready to have dinner when Chenard brings all that stuff in, that is flying by. And if you want to try to nail all of those stage directions, it's really fun, and it's a challenge. And so there's nothing wrong with, and I would encourage stage directors to follow what Puccini tells you to do in Bohème if you really want to tell the story.
Now, when you're casting people for this and you're casting singers, you primarily are hearing how they sing as you're casting them, and then you bring them into a room and you
Yeah.
realize one of them has theatrical experience and moves really well. Another one stands and sings in place.
Right.
So you have to do a lot of improvisation as a director and a designer to bring out the best in all of them in a short period of time.
Yeah, that's very true. And I just wanted to talk about Brian for a second. One of the things that makes a casting director such a difficult job is not only, of course, Brian, who knows these singers, knows their voices, or they're being recommended by agents, has to think in his head, okay, even if he's heard them, he has to imagine what Mimi's voice that we cast sounds like with Rodolfo's voice, right? It's not just about this particular singer is the best singer for this, right? You have to think of, especially an ensemble cast like Bohème, Brian has to think about how do these voices blend together in whatever theater we're going to be in. And then, of course, he can't really necessarily deal with how they act necessarily, right? Once he decides that vocally these are the correct people for this role, for these roles together as an ensemble, then I meet them on August 8th. And as a director, the best thing you can do is use everyone's abilities to their advantage, right? I mean, you encourage the best in them. And if you're a supportive, really, and we pride ourselves on being a supportive, collaborative, really safe environment, really, really safe rehearsal room, and you get the best out of people. So even if someone is more of a stand and sing kind of a person, but they're with someone else that's not, you can find a way to get them to do what's best for the overall piece.
When you're performing in Western Massachusetts, you're doing a concert at the Mahawi, which is a old vaudeville house movie theater, and the Colonial, which was also a vaudeville house. And back in the day, the opera companies would come, up and down the railroad tracks, so to speak, and they'd stop and do a show in Great Barrington. They'd move on to Pittsfield and all of that. These old theaters, like the Colonial or the Mahawi, how does opera sound in them now? Do they still have the acoustics that they had back in the day, or do you have to amplify them for today's audience?
No, they're phenomenal. And remember, look, the ideal theater for opera are these 700-800 seat houses, right? We're bringing in the best opera singers in the world. These are voices that can fill the Metropolitan Opera, a 4,000 seat house. So imagine that voice in an 800 seat theater. It's spectacular. The theaters present challenges from a production standpoint because there's not wing space in the Mahawi, or there's no dressing rooms, or there's no pit in the Mahawi. So there are technical problems that we have to solve, which are all solvable. Again, my designers are brilliant. My technical director is brilliant. So we solve those problems. We're really creative. But in terms of seeing opera in a small theater, that's what opera was meant for, and they're never amplified, and they soar over the orchestra, and it's really exciting and it's intimate. I mean, if you're in the last seat in the house in the Mahawi or the Colonial, you're still almost like you're sitting in the orchestra level of the Metropolitan Opera, right? You're seeing their faces. The voice is blowing over you.
I don't think people realize when they go to the Opera House, the Met is a huge theater, or the State Theater where the New York City Opera performed and stuff like that. But in Europe, the opera houses are grandiose, but they're not huge. Or in the same way,
1,200 seats.
Or you go to a Broadway show in New York at a Broadway theater, and it's really small compared to the Bushnell in Hartford.
Yes. Yeah, those are the theaters for which opera was actually created, because of obviously when opera is created and have amplification. So these singers were projecting in very well built acoustical theaters. And even going back to the Greeks, right, outdoor amphitheaters, and the voices they projected. So no, it's exciting to see opera in these small European style houses here in the Berkshires.
It must make it different for a singer to sing at the Colonial, where you have to sing over an orchestra. But do you have to amplify your singers, or?
No, never. And actually, our tagline is, experience the unamplified human voice. It is a visceral experience when you witness and hear and sit in a theater where a human voice that is unamplified can shake your seat. For me, I mean, honestly, it's one of the reasons I fell in love with opera and I couldn't believe that the human voice was capable of doing that. And I'm still, 25 years into this career, grateful every time I walk into that rehearsal room and I get to be in a room with these singers, whatever theater I'm at in the world, I pinch myself because experiencing that is truly remarkable.
How did you get into opera in the first place?
I was a violinist growing up. I loved classical music, and I discovered opera on the radio. I was at the Texaco broadcast at that time. In my bedroom, I was 11 or 12 years old, and became obsessed. It's one of those art forms that kind of speaks to you or doesn't. It spoke to me, and then ended up making it my career. I started working when I was 18 professionally. I kind of found my path right away. So it was pretty amazing.
Yeah, I mean, for a lot of us, I grew up listening to the Met. My mother would listen to the Met every Saturday afternoon on the radio.
Yeah.
And it did not resonate with me. I was a theater person until I was working in Washington, D.C. at a theater called Wolf Trap, and the Metropolitan Opera came. And I think the first production I saw of was Carmen. And I realized this is musical theater. This is what I live, the world I live in, but it's bigger and it's more exciting.
It's bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's that unamplified voice. I don't know if it struck you in a certain way, really experiencing that unamplified voice soaring over an orchestra of 100, over a chorus of 100, it's kind of mind boggling, right?
It is. And, I use my voice in radio. I'm trained as a radio person and I have a theatrical training, but I cannot imagine speaking out or singing over an orchestra in a hall. It's just,
right. And sustaining it right for, 2-3 hours. It's really, it's an Olympic feat, truly.
And even in the world of Broadway, I mean, as a child, I saw Ethel Merman perform, and she had that voice that went right out, and you could feel the seats in the last row shaking when she sang.
That's what I'm talking about.
It's an amazing thing that the human voice can do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I would assume that's why they don't do back-to-back shows, because they need a lot of rest and all of that.
That's exactly right. Yeah, people think Broadway, they're doing 8 shows a week. They're not to take anything away from them, but they're mic'd. So they're singing in a very different way. Yeah, opera singers need minimum 1 day, but 2 to 3 to 4 is ideal, especially depending on the opera. They really need to completely recover from the amount of strength it takes to do what they do vocally.
We only got a second or two left, so we got to tell people how to get information on everything that Berkshire Opera Festival does. And in terms of the upcoming performances, July 22nd at the Mahawi in Great Barrington, and then Bohème begins performances at the end of August at the Colonial in Pittsfield. How can people learn more about Berkshire Opera?
Yeah, www.berkshireoperafestival.org. You can also call 413-213-6622 or info@berkshireoperafestival.org. Get your tickets. I know Bohème is selling quickly, so I'd say get on it.
And also social media. I see all of your stuff on Facebook.
Yes, at Berkshire Opera Fest.
Yep.
On both Instagram and I think Facebook as well.
Well, Jonathan, thanks for being here today. I am so glad that we have opera in Western Massachusetts at 2 gorgeous theaters. So, you guys are doing a great job. It's the 8th season, and as you say, you're programming for the next 3 or 4 years already.
Yeah.
So hopefully, if audiences show up and people donate and contribute and all that, we'll have opera here for a long time to come.
That's the plan. Thank you so much for having me. Great conversation.
Good to see you. And this wraps up another edition of Artsbeat TV and Radio for the week. Peter Coles has been our chief engineer. I'm Mark Auerbach, and we'll see you next Friday with an all-new edition of Artsbeat.
I just want to know what happened.
And what do you think that will get you?
Sleeping through the night, closing a chapter. You know what I want even more is to be just who I was before. Self-assured future future all secured, that was Julia. Quick to trust, saw the world as just, that was Julia. Full of promise and full of poise, hardly any of which this shop girl now employs. But I muddle through, easy smile, avid cinephile, that was Julia. That was Julia. Before being branded a gold star wife, a distinction that's redefining my whole life. Well, it feels like it does. I feel guilty because there are days when I just want to be who I was. I'm not saying I trade the life that I had with him for a minute. That was once in a lifetime love, and I know I was lucky to win it. And I'm told to be proud. All the newsreels and magazines practically shout it, but I'm never allowed to admit there is nothing remotely heroic about it. And you know I would never be able to say that away from this dining room table. Not a doubt how her life plays out, that was Julia. All the details of who I am made irrelevant with one single telegram. That's what widowhood does. I resent it because there are days when I just want to be momentarily free.